the banks have either been unable or unwilling to provide support to assist that sector. And that's forced many small businesses to go to the wall. Unfortunately, these small businesses don't have the PR machines of the large companies, so therefore it really doesn't get to the press and to the likes of your show. But many people are suffering as a result of that. And I think, in my experience, when you approach banks, when even a business has a temporary problem, you're in a situation there where they expect full business plans, and a lot of small businesses aren't in a position to do that. So therefore, the result of that is that the customer gets their interest rate increased, they get their fees increased, and it exacerbates the problem that they're facing. In the last, probably the last 4 weeks, one local bank who was on your programme last night has basically gone to 5 of my customers and pulled in their overdrafts ranging from £5,000 to £25,000.
First Trust you're talking about?
Yeah, they put those onto a term loan. So, in other words, now a customer with a 10,000 overdraft that basically normally would borrow in around 5,000 are now being forced to borrow 10,000. They have to operate their account in credit from here on in. The impact of that is that the bank has, these people are operating now with 5,000 in credit, and the bank has free use of their funds. So the customer now is borrowing more money than they need to. They're paying increased fees and interest on that money.
So
they're now sitting with credit balances which the banks can use freely to lend out to other people at increased rates.
So this is First Trust again. What are you saying First Trust are doing?
Well, basically, they just said to people, we want to turn your overdraft into a loan.
And what's the advantage to the bank of doing that?
It's easier for the banks to operate, basically, on a loan because you don't have the management of managing an overdraft.
And if a customer says, I don't want a loan, I want to stick with my overdraft?
Well, basically, then they're told that they have to immediately repay their overdraft.
But your First Trust and other banks like them know that people don't have the money to repay the overdraft. That's why they've got an overdraft.
Well, that's why they're forced to take out the loan and then operate in credit.
Remarkable this. So 84559 555 678. Dominic. Morning, Dominic.
Morning, Stephen.
You'd like to speak to Jonathan Davis this morning?
Jonathan, really, I haven't seen a snippet of the programme last night and hearing a fairly hysterical attack on the representatives in the British Bank Association and the people in the audience probably witnessed it. I mean, we've got too much pessimism. We've got too much people highlighting probably feelings of the bank's own internal compliance going backwards. But to actually predict another 30 or 40% downfall, to me, is absolutely ludicrous. And it's without foundation. I mean, we're now seeing more normal, affordable models being used by banks. That should limit people getting into the difficulties that they got into in the past.
Without foundation? Did you not just hear the list of things that I said, what's happening in the economy?
Well, you're talking about things nationally. I think people here in
No, I'm talking about things locally. 60% of the Northern Ireland GDP is public sector spending. And if the Tories get in the early part of next year, we pretty well know they're going to slash public sector spending.
Okay. Well, we'll deal with a couple of things. I mean, I don't think that we can guarantee they're going to cut them to such an extent that it's going to precipitate a 30 to 40% fall in house prices from where they've currently fallen to.
What's the average earnings in Northern Ireland?
Well, if you go by Declan Curry's assessment, it's about £27,000.
And what's the average house price?
If we go again by the same assumptions, it's going to be in some reason of £150,000.
Which is, it's give or take 6 times earnings.
No.
They're only lending 3 times earnings and about 75% mortgages.
Okay. Let's
just join the dots.
Okay.
That's all you have to do.
I'll join the dots in. I'll take a couple and we'll say they're both on the average income of $27,000 each. We'll combine that and that gives them $50,000 of income. We'll use your reduced borrowings, which is a crude way of assessing affordability, and we'll say that the banks start giving them around about, say, 3 times their income. They're there. They can afford it.
Oh, but I know that. They can afford 150,000.
All right. Listen, we're going to have to join the dots some other time.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. Morning to you all. We appreciate your time. Here's the 10 o'clock news. Here's how we do the biggest radio show in the country.
We've got got ourselves into this terrible state.
When were you in Rome?
We met in church, actually.
When were you in Rome, Nessie?
There's nothing really serious going on, you know.
No, I wasn't in Rome. I just read about it.
Don't you dare! Don't you dare accuse me of being a witch.
What are you worried about?
It's like youngsters fighting over a bag of sweets.
You're a nosy article, Stephen.
All righty, who have we got now? Professor Hilliard. Good morning to you, Professor.
Good morning.
Lovely to talk to you today. We're in the middle of this. We've been doing a whole series all week on BBC One, Northern Ireland, called On the Brink. We've been looking at the financial situation in Northern Ireland, personal debt, mortgages, small business.
I've been able to see some of your programmes, on the ones on debt are excellent.
I guess we're concentrating, thank you, I guess we're concentrating today on the situation that property owners find themselves in and they don't know how to get out of it.
It's a very serious situation, but the point I wanted to make is that anybody looking at the statistics could quite easily see this crisis coming as early as 2003. I mean, if you look at the retail price index, which was, if you take 1985, then that was rising very, very slowly. But then if you look at it for house prices, it was just going up through the roof. And anybody who, like I've done, studied housing in Northern Ireland for the last 30 years, it was quite clear that it was very unsustainable. And one of the key factors in that was the buy-to-let scheme. And again, if you look at the way that was operating, it was forcing out first-time buyers. More and more investors were coming in. So the ratio of new mortgages suddenly changed from going to first-time buyers to buy-to-let investors. And that was clearly stoking up the market. So we saw the house price index, if you took it as 100 in 1985, it went up to 870 in 2007. And the ordinary retail price index has only gone up to about 230 points. So it was quite obvious that there was going to be a major crisis. And anybody who'd studied the saving and loan scandal in the States in the 80s, then it was quite clear about all the repercussions which were going to happen. But the trouble was the dominance of the economic profession who were saying this crisis cannot happen. And so those of us in social policy and sociology who were trying to say, look, this is a crisis about to happen, our voices were actually killed.
So do you feel, because if you were looking at those statistics, you would have thought that the major banks would be looking at the same forecasts?
Well, this was it. But the trouble is with the banks, they wanted to make money. And so what they were doing is that throwing money at the housing market, either they were doing it through the buy-to-let scheme, or else developers were coming along and saying they wanted to borrow money. And I heard the story of one developer going in looking for 50 million, and the bank said, we'll give you 100 million. And so there was this complete madness that was in the financial markets. And that was part of the problem which was set in motion in the 1980s when, of course, banks were deregulated. And so, all those controls which had been in place to have sensible lending were just thrown out of the window. And that was the beginning of the crisis. And as I say, anybody who studied the saving and loan scandal when all the controls were let loose in the States, then it was very predictable that this would happen again because people are greedy. People want to make money. And particularly when you have a bonus scheme which rewards risk, then all these factors have led to the development of this particular crisis. And it's going to take a very, very long time for us to get out of it.
Well, and that was my next question. Where are we now and how long until the good times in property come back?
Well, I'm very pessimistic because, for a start, the impact of unemployment on the housing market hasn't really worked its way through yet. So that would take some time. But I also guess that there's a large number of developers out there who are technically insolvent, but the banks aren't prepared to pull the plug on them because that will then put the banks in a bad light.
So what? Just
to
explain what you mean there, what I think you mean there. I'm sure you can talk better than I can for yourself, but there could be a situation in Northern Ireland. I think this is what you mean. That banks know that developers are never going to be able to maintain their payments, but what they're doing is they're allowing them to roll the interest that they have up, and they're allowing them to do that and incur more and more debt because the banks don't want to pull the plug on the developers, because then what will happen?
Well,
The property will go onto the bank's asset sheet, and the banks don't want the properties either.
Exactly, and so, you do have this situation where people are not coming clean. So you have this huge toxic debt out there, which nobody really knows what the size of it is. And my prediction is that at some point, a lot more of that will become public, and so at that point in time, the economic situation looks pretty bleak again.
So
and we of course, the impact of unemployment, I think, is going to be crucial. As you showed on your program of the small businesses, I mean, you only need a number of those to go bankrupt, and more small businesses taking that line where they have to lay off people, and then eventually they can't function at all. I mean, when the impact of all those little bits of the economy take its impact, then the impact on house prices will obviously be important.
What is your background?
I'm a sociologist, but studied social policy for years, particularly in Northern Ireland, and we carried out the first house condition survey in 1974. So, I know the housing market here pretty intimately.
So, therefore, do you agree with Jonathan Davis this morning that we could expect more, to the extent of 30 to 40% falls, more?
Well, I wouldn't put a figure on it, but I can't. I would predict that there's going to be a further fall in house prices. It's inevitable. All the factors he has outlined are there, and John Simpson's position, I think, is far too optimistic. But he's an economist, and it's the economists who've got it wrong. It's other voices, particularly in social policy, who've been saying, who've been studying, who come from a background of having studied the housing market for years and the dynamics of that housing market, that were saying very early on, much earlier on than other people, that this is a crisis. You cannot have a house market sustained at this rate, where the retail price index goes from 100 to 800 in no less than 20 years. Completely unsustainable.
And the situation we're dealing with today, the story dominant on the Nolan Show today is that of some developers now forcing sales. Developers saying to people, you signed a contract a couple of years ago, you've put down a deposit, we want the rest of the money. And
that's a strict legal position that they're taking, but I would have thought it was very advisable for and beneficial for everybody in Northern Ireland that they do reach some agreement between the the potential purchasers and themselves. Otherwise, this is going to be a disaster waiting to happen in terms that the developers themselves presumably will go out of business. But it would mean that a large number of people will be made bankrupt as a result of this. Do
you have sympathy for individuals who got caught up in the, call it what you will, the greed bubble?
I mean, but it was lemming-like, wasn't it? People felt that house prices were going up, and they felt, well, a number of first-time buyers certainly felt they had to get onto the housing market because otherwise they would never do it. And a lot of financial advisors were encouraging that. A lot of banks were just saying, yes, we will give you the money. So the whole mood was one which was completely contrary to what the statistics were showing us. As I've already emphasised, they showed very clearly that this was completely unsustainable.
We do a major programme last night, a 1 hour live programme where we're saying to the people of Northern Ireland, this is your chance to talk to us. We want to bring you the information. And we speak to the 4 major local banks here in Northern Ireland. And only one of them wanted to talk to the people, their customers. What do you read into that? That these other major institutions, the Northern Bank, the Ulster Bank, they didn't want to come anywhere near the ordinary people.
I think
the First Trust did.
I mean, quite clearly, I think that's irresponsible. I think the banks have to, say what their policies were and why they allowed this to happen. When all the major series of statistics in relation to housing, in terms of the proportion of new-time buyers to buy-to-let buyers, the retail price index, the house price index, all of these concrete series of statistics were indicating quite clearly what was about to happen. And, when the bankers say they couldn't actually see it happening, that's totally irresponsible. They didn't want to see it happening because they were making so much money out of the various products which they had devised in order to encourage people into the housing market. And if you look at the situation in other countries, they're in a much stronger position because they didn't have this wild frenzy, because they had adequate controls. For example, in Italy, this situation didn't occur because people just didn't believe that you could buy houses on the never-never, as we did here with huge, great mortgages, in some cases 110%.
Final question, Professor Hilliard. What do you do now then if you did get caught up in this and you've got a huge mortgage? You can pay it, but you've got a huge mortgage. Should you be optimistic for the future?
Well, it's going to take a very long time to get out of this economic crisis.
And what's a long time?
Well, I'm, not a specialist economist. My one area of interest has been the housing market, but I would predict that it's going to take at least 5 years before there's a radical change in the current situation where house prices are going down.
I know that a senior banker said to me last night that he thinks prices aren't going to recover to their 2007 peak until 2018, nearly another 10 years away.
I mean, I don't like to put figures on these sorts of things. I think that the position to take is all the factors that would impact on the housing market suggest that it will continue going down for a good while yet.